be in Genesis chapter 3.
Chapter what?
3.
My hearing's off today.
Hello, welcome. Welcome to Grace Baptist Church in Bay County, Florida. Please turn to Genesis chapter 3. We are coming to the end of the section in God's attributes. The doctrine of God, the attribute of God as creator. God as creator. What have we taken a look at? Remember, we took a look at Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2. We looked at Psalm 104. 3 different creation stories, the atheists will tell us. But in today, we are going to see that the doctrine of God as creator has a lot to do with our understanding of what has happened in the relationship between God and humankind. Now, those of you who are already familiar with Genesis chapter 3 know what's coming. God has created the universe in 6 days. Now, a lot of people say, it can't be done, or that's not how it went. Well, friends, were you there? No, I wasn't there. Okay. Why can't it be done? Well, that's just not how universes work, friends. If you were not there, and if you have not created your own universe out of nothing, please hold off, please refrain from telling me what works and what doesn't work. Well, I've got my science. Yes, you do, my friend, for all the good it will do you. But in the scriptures, we have the testimony of God himself. The one personal being who was there. And he has told us in the Holy Scriptures how he created. And those of you who don't like that creation account, I think you have to find a better source for information. Meaning this, there is no better source. Well, I have my science. Maybe you do. I want to put my revelation up against your science any time. Before we get into Genesis chapter 3, I'm going to read from Romans chapter 3, verses 9 to 16. You don't need to turn there if you don't want to. But it says this. Paul says, we have already charged that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin, as it is written. There is no one righteous, not even one.
9.
Pastor Bruce just referenced Romans chapter 3, verse 23 in his message. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Well, it says here, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. We're going to read about the fall into sin in a moment. But I want to tell you, there's been not a small number of non-believers and atheists who have asked the question, what's so bad about eating an apple? About eating that fruit? In the Middle Ages, does anybody, and pardon me friends, I'm about to show you a gesture that is considered obscene in this culture. For good reason. It is a curse. I'm going to show you the Middle Ages form of this gesture. And here it goes. Please forgive me, friends. I have to get my fingers right here. But this is the gesture. This is the gesture. The Middle Ages form of the gesture looked like this. Now, in modern culture, it looks like this. And I apologize for showing you this. But I'm giving you a history lesson. In the Middle Ages, it was like this. How did that come about? Well, you had two nations at war in the Middle Ages. You had France and you had England. And they were at war. England, in general, is the smaller of the two nations. Well, it's always the smaller of the two nations. But in general, France is the power. France has more resources. France has more people. And so when it comes time to throwing weight around, France is going to tend to dominate the battles, you would think. And indeed, that is true for much of the Middle Ages, with one important exception. The English, while they still had forests, by the way, there are very few forests in England today because they have virtually cut down all the trees. And what little trees they do have left is a very small proportion to what it once was. And the trees have not had the hundreds of years of time to grow like they had in the Middle Ages. But in the Middle Ages, what the English did have was they had the ability to fashion a particular kind of bow and arrow, out of a particular kind of tree that was common and plentiful enough in England. And it was, perhaps you've seen some of those bows, like the bow and arrow for Cupid is like about what, like this, like about this tall. It's not very tall, and Cupid is a little baby and, troublesome in shooting arrows. Well, I'm told, I'm not very familiar with the subject myself, but I'm told that these bows could often be very long. They were called long bows for that reason. So from here to the ground could be the bow. And it was many English men would train themselves for decades to pull this long bow from the ground, from here to the ground. They would pull it and they would launch an arrow. And that arrow could fly an exceptionally far distance for the time. On top of that, the French had armor. And longbow shots at a shorter distance were armor-piercing. So, France and England would have battles. And typically the English would be outnumbered, but they would have longbowmen. And because of that, England started winning battles. They invaded France. They started conquering in France. And the French would lose battles, and they'd be like, after they lost the battle. And the English would be, ha, 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 ha. And so if you were an Englishman and you were captured by the French, what would they do to you? Well, on the right hand, when you draw the bow, you don't draw the bow. You see today typically a lot of people show the motion drawing with all 4 fingers. That's generally not true, I'm told. It's these 2 fingers, the strongest fingers you have, and they are the ones doing the drawing for this special long bow. And so if you, an English person, were captured by the French would be able to neutralize you as a military asset against them in the future by cutting off or otherwise damaging these 2 fingers. Because then you couldn't draw this great, big, huge longbow. So, what would happen? After the battles, the French would go, rah, 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 rah. And what would the English do to show the French back? So the French are going, rah, 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 and what would the English do? Ha, 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 ha. I still have these. And that's the origin of where we got this. Why are we talking about that? Well, why are France and England battling each other? They're at war. They're enemy combatants. And the French would curse at the English because they were at war. And the English would curse right back at the French. You know, King Louis doesn't have these yet. That's what they would say. Now, this has to do a lot with Genesis chapter 3. There is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. Here it comes. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. This is what Pastor Bruce has been preaching on. Now let's look into Genesis chapter 3 itself. Starting at verse 1. Now, the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden. But about the fruit of that one tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it, or you will die." The serpent said to the woman, "No, you will not die. In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So let's go back to our question from our atheist friends. So, Mr. Christian, what's the big deal? Who is God to get so upset with us just wanting a piece of fruit? Who is God to get upset with us for just wanting a little bit more knowledge? Just want some knowledge. Verse 8, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Now why have they hid?
They're ashamed.
They are ashamed. Why are they ashamed?
They're naked.
That's true, but they were naked before.
Until they learn the knowledge. They
Something-
were without sin.
Something has happened.
Yeah.
Something has come to them and changed who they are. They hid from God. We are to find out later in the scriptures for the reasons that were outlined in Romans chapter 3. They have become vile and loathsome. They became filthy and defiled. They became an object of horror for a holy God to look at. Well, that's awfully strong medicine there, Brock. Verse 9. So the Lord God called out to the man and said to him, where are you? Verse 10, and the man said, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Then God asked, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? The man replied, the woman you gave me. She gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate. So the Lord God asked the woman, what have you done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. Friends, what happened to Adam and Eve when they ate? Something changed them.
They become knowledge.
They had that awareness of their nakedness that came to them. But they were naked before, and they were aware of their nakedness before. Rather, what has happened here is that the consequences of their action have started to become apparent.
They committed the sin.
they have committed the sin. Thank you, Mrs. T. Now, what kind of sin was it? Some of my non-Christian friends will say, it's just a little sin. They just ate an apple or a fruit. How could your God possibly be upset about that? Well, friends, let's go back to our medieval English lesson. This is why. What has changed is this. Humankind, before the eating of the fruit, was what? They were in league with God. They had fellowship with God. They had communion with God. They were allies with God. What happened after they ate the fruit? They have declared war against God. God, your rules, that's what I think of your rules, God. Hey, God, you think you're my boss? I spit at you. I give you, God, the middle finger. Now someone will say, I don't see that strident of an enmity between Adam and Eve and God in this. And I would say, friends, it wasn't as overt and as well developed as it would be to come. Rebellion looks cute in little kids. You tell little Timmy, put your toys away. It's time for bed. Little Timmy looks up at you and says, no. Oh, little Timmy, that's so cute. Oh, little Timmy just being a little rambunctious. He's just expressing himself. No, friends. If you are a parent and you love your child, you'll take little Timmy aside, and let's just say this. You will dispense the board of justice to the seat of higher learning so that little Timmy has a chance to have his attitude adjusted. Now, there's some question here. Eve appears to be genuinely deceived. I mean, that's the way it reads in the text, right? It's not like Eve said, oh boy, we get to be God's enemies now. But at the same point in time, think about the insult. Think about the insult before God. A serpent came to her and said, why don't you eat this fruit? And she said, well, God told us not to. And the serpent said, I think you should. And she was like, yeah, I'm going to. And she did. Friends, the most gruesome of evils looks small in the beginning. And we can only see what the effects of this sin are from chapter 3 as we go through the scriptures together. But if you have been a reader of the scriptures for any period of time, you have read the wickedness. You have read the violence. You have read the destruction and the disorder and the disobedience to God that comes from everyone else who is descended from this first pair of humans. And so in some sense, everything you read in the Bible from Adam and Eve's posterity is a reflection of the wickedness, of the sin that was latent in that first eating of that first apple, that forbidden fruit, whatever it was. It might not have been an apple. We're not sure what fruit it actually was. Verse 14. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you've done this, you are cursed more than any livestock, and more than any wild animal. You will move on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. I will put hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. First of all, the serpent is cursed. And not just that particular serpent, right? Not just that serpent on that day in that garden, but what?
Oh.
All serpents. This is the key to understanding the federalism or the representative nature that is associated with this curse. God says all serpents are going to face the consequences for what one serpent has done to disobey. By the way, an interesting thing. God says you will move on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. That appears as a curse. What does it mean that the serpents did before? How did serpents move around before they were cursed? This dust thing and crawling on their belly is a consequence of their curse. And by the way, what's the point of having them crawl on their belly? It's a loss of status. It's an indication of disgrace. An animal that was once, here I'm going to say it, once upright, now is a dust eater. Yes, you've heard it right. Some people, I wasn't there, friends. I wasn't there. I don't know for sure. But there are some hints, indications here that perhaps serpents walked upright. And now they have fallen and they crawl on their bellies. Are you teaching this as dogmatic? Friends, I wasn't there. But you can see why someone might read this text and think that. By the way, did you notice how God has shifted from walking in the cool of the day, friend, to what? How is God speaking now to them? He's speaking as a judge, giving what? A legal sentence, reading